Hello again, everyone. We are moving with the Switzerland report. Switzerland report is presented by Miss Anu. Anu is doing her research on forced marriage. It's a comparative research. Includes Switzerland, Great Britain, Netherlands, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Turkey. Currently, she is working at Zurich University. And she will give the speech. Thank you, Anu. Stage is yours.
Thank you, Muhammad, for the introduction, and also thank you for having me as part of this Law Summer School during this period of time, and also thank you for the students for the interest in this topic. So Muhammad has already mentioned a few words about me, just to add to this introduction. As he mentioned, I'm doing a legal comparative study on the topic of forced marriage, which is also a main, one of the main crimes from the Istanbul Convention. So I'm doing it from a comparative study. That means he mentioned my field of works, the country. So Turkey is one of the countries that I'm researching, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and then I'm comparing with the legal measures in the Great Britain, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. So this is to my research project. And apart from that, I'm also part of the Swiss government's competence center against forced marriages. So there I bring also the view from the practice, from the field in that sense, because the Swiss competence center against forced marriage, they deal with cases per week, 5 to 14. Yes, if you're interested, we can deep into this in their question round for sure. So in the following 30 minutes, I would like to present how Switzerland is implementing, on one hand, the articles of the Istanbul Convention, but also in regard to the legal landscape in general, domestic violence and violence against women. So in order to prepare this presentation, I have received a bunch of questions, very interesting ones. So I'm going to try to integrate them in my presentation and try to answer them, obviously. So the first one was whether Switzerland is part of the Istanbul Convention, and if yes, since when, and whether there are any reservations regarding the convention. So as you can see here in the slide, Switzerland has ratified the Istanbul Convention, which came into force on 1st of April 2018. And there were 4 reservations made by Switzerland. Well, according to literature, they say it's much more technical nature, so technical in the sense of from a juristic point of view. So the first one is, I'm just going to briefly say to the Article 41 about the jurisdiction. So, and another one was about the principle of double punishability, where there is also exemptions, for example, on the crime of forced marriage or female genital mutilation, which we can talk deeper later on. And then the third one is Article 55, that's about also the procedure on application upon request and ex officio. And the fourth reservation is on Article 59, that's the chapter on migration and asylum, about resident status of migrants affected by violence in the Istanbul Convention. This is very shortly about the reservations made by Switzerland. And the next question was whether there is a legal definition of domestic violence in our legislation. So Switzerland does not have a legal definition of domestic violence and violence against women in the criminal law, so the Swiss Criminal Code. Hence, single criminal offenses that can be part of domestic violence or violence against women are regulated, among other, for example, serious assault. You can see the related articles in the criminal law projected on the slide. So there's a serious assaults, common assaults and acts of aggression, threatening behavior, coercion, and indecent assault or rape. And then again, the specific crime also female genital mutilation and forced marriage. So the Confederation or the Swiss government suggest, or they refer also that the definition of the Istanbul Convention may be used as a reference when domestic or violence against women is at stake, and as it involves violence within intimate partnerships, in families, and also households. So dissolved relationships and economic violence are also part of this definition. Here you see an ordinance mentioned, the name in German. So you have the translation on the slide. The Ordinance on Measures to Prevent and Combat Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. That's also the full name of Istanbul Convention, isn't it? So this one came into force in January 2020 in Switzerland, this ordinance. And this defines also violence against women and domestic violence as psychological, physical, and sexual violence, including, for example, also sexual harassment, stalking again. We don't have a specific provision in the criminal code against stalking, but this is part of understanding of violence against women. And then forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and forced abortion and forced sterilizations. And the next question was whether violence against women is accepted as discrimination based on gender, so this gendered specific aspect. So according to its classification, domestic violence and violence against women is accepted as discrimination based on gender, which has its legal basis in the Swiss Constitution and the prohibition of discrimination. That's the Article 8, equality before the law, in the Swiss Constitution. So beyond gender discrimination, this provision, Article 8, provides also for the illegality of any discrimination based on origin, race, gender, age, language, lifestyle, religious, philosophical, or political convictions, and so on, as you can read further on the slide. And also, moreover, this provision sets the standard of equality between men and women, as you can see in the paragraph 3. So hence, when domestic violence or violence against women is at stake, this discrimination is made up by gendered patterns that are linked, for example, to the issues of intimate concerns such as sexuality, as well as gender roles. So here, women are likely to become victims of violence. The way to determine what is discrimination, we are looking on this in regard to the following steps that I'm going to mention. So the first one is to determine whether there is an unequal treatment leading to a disadvantage for a person or a group compared to another group or a group of people. In casu, violence against women is unequal treatment in the sense that women are more likely to be a victim of violence, domestic violence, than men. So there is inequality there, right? So, which is also pointed by the WHO, the World Health Organization. So secondly, the inequality has to be based on suspect criterion. The criteria, as you can see here also in the Article 8, paragraph 2, race, gender, age, way of life, etc. So here, when we talk about gendered specific, the violence is based on the criteria gender. So in cases of discrimination, no justification is allowed, as every type of discrimination is considered as a human rights violation. Moving to the next question, whether there are special types of crime mentioned in the Swiss criminal law that comes from the Istanbul Convention. So I have already mentioned before that domestic violence or violence against women are not specifically determined, I mean, with the legal definition, but there are specific offenses which may be part of such forms of gendered violence. And there are also few exceptions, such as forced marriage. This is according to 181A in the Swiss Criminal Code. And this is recognized as a special type of crime. And this came into force on 1st of July 2013. Obviously, before that, forced marriage is also illegal. So before 2013, forced marriage was looked at as a type of coercion, which is the case in, for example, in Turkey as well. Turkey doesn't have a specific provision in the penal code against forced marriage, but they see it as a type of coercion. And then the next special types of crime is female genital mutilation in Article 124 of the Swiss Criminal Code. This came into force in 2012. Again, also here, before 2012, FGM was only an offense when it was seen as a serious assault, for example, according to 122. And here also, which was only the case for certain type of female genital mutilation, according to the literature, infibulation and excision. But the law has, as I mentioned, changed since 2012. Whether these specific qualifications leads to increasement of the punishment of these crimes, here we can see also that recognition of these forms of violence, such as that offenders that are prosecuted for forced marriage, as you can read in the slide also, they can face up to 5 years imprisonment, compared to, for example, the prosecution for coercion, where perpetrators only face up to 3 years imprisonment. So there is an increase of punishment for the specific type of qualified type of coercion in the matters of marriage. And in case of FGM, as you can see also that the maximum sentence is 10 years of imprisonment and the minimum sentence is a monetary penalty. And through the recognition as a special crime, in the case of the mentioned examples, these are prosecuted ex officio. So, and therefore investigated with or without a complaint by the victim. So before that, an investigation took only place when there was a complaint by the victim in case of FGM, because they didn't have a specific crime when it was an infibulation or excision. For acts as a common assault, for example, according to the 123 of the Swiss Criminal Code, repeated acts of aggression, threatening behavior, indecent assaults, or rape, those are prosecuted ex officio since 2004. So that means they have also to be prosecuted when there is no complaint by the victim. However, common assault, repeated acts of aggression and threatening behavior are only prosecuted ex officio if they occur in a context of marriage or intimate partnership or registered partnership. Otherwise, a complaint is necessary. And also further offenses that may be part of domestic violence or violence against women, such as a single act of aggression that does not cause any injury, according to Article 126, unlawful entry, 186 Penal Code, and also, for example, misuse of a telecommunications installation, which could be also a form of violence in the context of gendered violence, right? So these are occurring, for example, when a victim is stalked, in a case of stalking, this is very often used, are only when there is a complaint. Moving to the next question, whether, what are the measures regarding domestic violence and violence against women? And they ask also specifically in private law and then in criminal law. So if the police is called in cases of domestic violence, they can apply direct measures such as an expulsion order for the violent person so that he or she is not allowed to enter the apartment, or a restraining order. And if there is a criminal investigation following the police deployment, prosecuting authorities can enact processual coercive measures as a restraining or exclusion orders instead of pretrial detention. So in case that the accused person does not follow the measures, she can be taken into pretrial detention. And if the victim, if the victim and perpetrators, not in the context of marriage, but generally speaking, according to Article 28b in the Swiss Civil Code, this one can be also applied. So let's say violence against women in general. So there are protection measures such as restraining, expulsion order, and so on. And the aim here from this provision is the protection of personal rights against violence, threats or stalking, measures for which an application with bodies of evidence has to be made to the court. Also, what are the criminal procedures measures? So in criminal procedures measures, there are some general measures for victims of domestic violence in questioning for criminal investigations or in court that serve as a protection of the victims, protection of personality, support by a person in a position of trust, prevention of encounters with the accused person, or exclusion of confrontation. In cases of offenses against sexual integrity, there are measures as integrations by a person of the same gender, for example, and the right of victims to refuse to give evidence in regard to questions about their private sphere. And when there is a danger to life or serious disadvantages of involved persons because they are taking part in the criminal procedures, the procedural management can further enact protection measures upon request or ex officio. And they can also consist of guaranteeing anonymity, integrations or determination of identities out of the public gaze, or involved parties. So the change of appearance or voice, for example, so the identity in that sense, and the protection of the protected person from views, as well as restrictions on inspection of record. So generally, the victim has the right to demand the implementation of these measures. And here again, the victim can make an application to the court that the court decides after an weighing of interests. That means, for example, victims can generally demand to avoid an encounter with accused persons or a confrontation. This demand can be refused if the right to for example, fair hearing of the accused person cannot be guaranteed in other ways, or the major interest of the prosecution requires an encounter. So this is the weighing of interest which the court has to make. Prosecutors or the procedural management must inform the victims about their rights and obligations in the criminal procedure, about addresses and duties of victim advisory centers, possibilities of the use of victim support. So Switzerland has a special law, victim support law, and also time limits of applications for compensation, rights of the victim to get informed about decisions and facts of the execution of penalties and measures of the convicted person. So generally the right of information. Special measures are applied for protection when the victims are children. So in the case that children, persons under the age of 18 are questioned as informants in a criminal procedure, they do not have an obligation for a statement, and measures should prevent a secondary victimization through the burdens of a criminal procedure. And also here, integrations are made by, or could made by video integration, so to avoid direct confrontation here. And an expert needs to be present as well when children are being questioned. And then also confrontation with accused persons and amounts of integrations. These are also limited. If possible, all integrations should be carried out by the same person, not that every time a different person is coming and asking that child. So this is to protect the child. The criminal procedure can also be stopped if it's needed, obviously. The next question was about the statistics. Well, there are different official statistics on domestic violence in Switzerland. For example, the police criminal statistics of the Federal Office for Statistics, that is a statistic on registered offenses and on data of the accused and the injured person. So they have categories like age and gender, which is divided in these statistics. And another important is also the victims' AIDS statistic that offers information on the use of counseling for victims and compensation in accordance with the law on victim support. And people that use counseling for victims do not necessarily report a case of domestic violence to the police. To give you a more deeper understanding, as I mentioned in the introduction, I'm involved in the Swiss Competence Center Against Forced Marriage, and forced marriage being one type of crime from the Istanbul Convention. So our Swiss Competence Center, which also have a function as a counseling or supporting center, as I mentioned, we have 5 to 14 cases per week in Switzerland, and the victims are from here. So we don't have the obligation to report to the police officers the forced marriage cases, although it is a ex officio crime. So the counseling centers, advisory centers have a clause of confidentiality, which comes from the victim support law. So this is just to give you an example regarding this type of crime. Coming back to the statistic, another one to mention is the statistic on criminal judgments, informs about the extent, structure, and development of the prosecutions, about the prosecuted offenses, the sanctions, and the sentence. And all these statistics exist also on the level of federal and also of the cantons and districts. As you know, Switzerland has a federalist system structure. If some of you is interested in the statistic, you can email me. I can, because all of them are available online, and I can send you the link where you can find about more details about these numbers. Moving on to next question, whether the judicial and law enforcement authorities cooperate effectively in investigating and prosecuting domestic violence. So very recently, let's say as of April 2021, judicial authorities and law enforcement have made a point to improve their cooperation in cases of domestic violence investigation and prevention. And this includes an increase in sharing information and personal data between authorities, as well as putting in place a specific program of threat management. So the aim is also to train police officers and judicial authorities to respond adequately to victims of domestic violence or sexual violence, especially when hearing victims' statements. So preventing a new trauma and allowing the victims to share their experience is vital and needs the full cooperation of every authority who are involved. So both the law enforcement department of the Swiss Confederation and the president of the cantonal justice departments. So we have, as I already mentioned, due to the federalist system, there is a cooperation between the federal government and then different cantonal departments is needed. They have signed an agreement to improve their cooperation towards a better handling of domestic violence cases. The next question was whether the victims trust the judicial system. I think this question must be answered from a multi-perspective. There are more than one answer or factors when it comes to whether the trust in the judicial system is there or not. So according to a publication by the unit of the Swiss Criminal Prevention, this publication is from 2016, it says that only 20% of the offenses of domestic violence are reported to the police, and 70 to 90% of the victims make an application for a suspension of the legal proceeding. This is possible, or was possible, making the suspension possibilities. So one could say this could be an indication that there is not enough trust in the judicial system. But there is also the fear, I think, that a punishment of the perpetrator could lead to a disadvantageous for the victims. I can speak here from the experience with the cases that I have dealt in the case of forced marriage. As I said, it's an ex officio crime, but the Swiss Competence Center has per week so many cases. If you hear the victims or the affected persons, they do not want to proceed a criminal, use the criminal law. There are many reasons why they don't use the criminal law. It could be one that they don't want to have any, since mostly the perpetrators are family members. They are from your intimate, in that sense, your sphere, and that you don't want to harm them as a family members. You want to free yourself, but you don't want to harm your family members. And the other reasons is also that they think like they may also believe that a criminal proceeding is not changing the behavior of the perpetrator. And then also, for example, in the case of forced marriage, it's a kin-based gender violence. So that means the family members, the core family members and the extended family members are perpetrators, could be uncle, aunties, grandma, and so on. And they don't know what will happen if they would, for example, start a case against the mother or the father. They might be an uncle who is not living in Switzerland, but who is living in Germany or in Denmark, maybe in Turkey, in other countries, and they assume the threat, the danger might come from the different part of the world, and there is no guarantee that they are in safe place if they would go with the criminal proceedings as well. This is also one of the reasons why they don't prefer to choose the criminal law as one way to free themselves. As I mentioned, there are different explanations, but these might be one of them. Moving to the next question, whether, or it is specifically on risk analysis and risk assessment in domestic violence and violence against women in Switzerland. So the government prepared a report on risk analysis, especially in cases of domestic violence, and the three basic steps of already mentioned National Criminal Prevention Unit and several cantons are recognize, evaluate, and diffuse. So authorities as the Child and Adults Protection Unit or Victim Advisory Centers, they can discover or learn about threat that are a warning signal. And other alarm signals can be also purchase of a weapon or launching of a criminal proceeding. And depending on the arrangement of the risk analysis, only persons that work in an authority or an institution can launch the next step, but sometimes also private individuals. And the second step is the evaluation. If there's a risk for a violent offense, and the assessment of risk level. And it depends again on the canton. If standardized and validated instruments are used and which authorities are involved, that differs from canton to canton again. And the proceeding is multi-level, and then on each level, trained professionals are involved. And the third step is diffusing. In cases of an increased risk, the responsible authority or the institution launches an interdisciplinary case management, coordinating all measures that are available to the involved authorities that can de-escalate in the concrete case. So if the situation does not require an intervention, further developments are monitored, especially in cases with chronically increased danger situations, and monitoring over several years. Protection management is very important. And also in this interdisciplinary process, authorities such as the police, specialized competence centers, prosecution and probationary services, forensic psychiatry, children and adult protection unit, cantonal equal opportunity office, intervention agencies against domestic violence, victim advisory centers, perpetrator advisory centers, women shelters, welfare service, or addiction counseling, and others. As you can see, it's very interdisciplinary. Actors or stakeholders may be involved. There was also the question regarding whether there are special measures in Switzerland to protect children's physical integrity and psychological health and development in cases of domestic violence. I have already mentioned special circumstances, for example, when children are victims, and cases of children witnessing violence in the relationship of their parents are seen as endangerment of a child's welfare. And the aim to solve this endangerment is to end the violent relationship and the protection of the child from further violence. So there are measures in civil and criminal law, but also counseling, therapy, and shelters. Since January 2019, there are also new reporting rules on which authorities and persons in which cases can or must report to the children and adult protection units. So as you can already see, that we are differentiating here between the right to report and the obligation to report. When the police intervenes in cases of domestic violence and children are involved, a report will be made to the Children and Adult Protection Unit automatically. So there is an obligation. And the unit is responsible for the clarification of the endangerment of the child's welfare. But this unit can also delegate this to a specialized institutions as cantonal child and youth services, or for example, in forced marriage cases to the Swiss Competence Center or other stakeholders, or victim organizations, counseling services and shelters and so on. So they, again, a cooperation is here much needed as well. And here also to mention another example, in several cantons, they also exist psychosocial care for children who experienced or witnessed domestic violence. The next question was about how would I evaluate the relationship of the investigating authorities with other institutions of the state and also NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So in the criminal procedures, the relationships between investigating authorities and other institutions of the state and NGOs is mainly information-based as the judicial authorities can't give out personal data of the victims. Again, here the personal rights and data protection. They can't give the data of victims to non-governmental organization in order for them to contact the victims. But what happened is, in these cases, it has to be other way around. So the victims are given information about additional resources and extrajudicial help they can get, and are then able to go to these instances and have the help they can get. So also in such ways, in every canton, there are victim advisory centers available, and they can organize medical care, legal or psychological counseling, and also material help if needed. And other organizations are, for example, helplines for 24 hours, 7 days, for example, or medical support in case of violence, centers for protection and shelters, women shelters or shelters for girls under the age of 18, children that can provide temporary protection. Also private institutions, NGOs are also contributing to these measures. To finalize my presentation, there was the last question, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic. How was the situation, whether the domestic violence increased in Switzerland or not? So in regard to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, according to a news article from November last year, 2020, there were no reliable statistics available at that time. Generally, the police and victim advisory centers have not seen a significant increase. However, women shelters were reported to be full in November 2020. And also a media release of the Federal Office for Gender Equality, that was from March 2021, from this year, that shows that the police criminal statistics could not find a significant increase in offenses of domestic violence in 2020. But here, once more, we have to note that the police criminal statistics only record data of domestic violence that are reported to and registered by the police. And the Task Force Domestic Violence and Corona analyzes the situation on the basis of information of operational authorities, cantonal victim advisory centers, and shelters regularly since spring last year. And there is also some evidence that family conflicts and lighter form of domestic violence that do not lead to a report may have increased. And victim advisory centers noticed also in some cantons a trend for an increase of new registrations. Women shelters are largely working at capacity and have to send also persons seeking help to shelters of other cantons. And several cantons that gather data on police interventions see also a temporary increase of interventions. I want to mention one example of the canton of Bern, so the capital of Switzerland. The police interventions in cases of domestic violence, they reported an increasement about 40%, especially in the second half of last year. However, the pandemic could be seen as one factor, but as well the new police law in Bern. Again, the police law is different from one canton to another, and that improves the protection of victims, which is at force since beginning of 2020 last year. I have had also an impact. This and furthermore, the sensitization, of course, of the public are seen as important factors for the increase of police intervention as well. And in the topic of forced marriage, the Swiss Competence Center has also seen an increase of cases. I'm sure you are aware of this phenomena where people, for example, growing up in Switzerland, are brought a foreign country it might be the country of their parents, the origin country of their parents, and kept there or being forced to a marriage. This we call outplacement, or in some countries also abandonment. This phenomenon, we thought it's going to be very less due to the travel restrictions last year. But what happened is we have observed that the parents or the family members used the technology to conclude the marriage or to enter the wedlocks for their children, or to make promises and so on, so that they just postponed this forced marriage. So we are waiting that the cases are going to increase more as well. So overall, this was a short overview about the current situation in Switzerland concerning the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, but also again, largely on the legal landscape on domestic violence. So many thanks for your attention. And if you have any specific questions, I'm ready to answer you them.
Anu, thank you for such a great detailed presentation and explaining in a very short time. And there is also one question you can ask if you want, but I need to say it loud. Can you tell more about your research in the field of forced marriage in Turkey? What kind of statistics do you use in the case of Turkey? You said that you do a legal comparison. Is there also a sociological component in your research? Do you consider that as well?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Teresa Bender-Sebelkamp. Yes, my research is not a purely juristic one, since I'm interested in not only what is the law, but also how the law is used, and if there are any critiques from the field, like people who are working with this law. So I have also attached a sociological or interdisciplinary perspective to my research. So for this reason, I have spent in my 6 countries, let's say 5 countries, because Switzerland is my home country where I'm staying. I have spent half year in each countries and have done interviews with stakeholders who are working with law, for example, lawyers, judges, but also institutions and organizations who work in this field. Regarding Turkey, there are plenty of NGOs. I mean, the women rights movement is very older and very long in Turkey as well. There are many organizations that I have contacted, also well-known lawyers, female lawyers who work in this field. There's unfortunately not a statistic on specifically on forced marriage in Turkey, but I try with the statistic which is provided through the government, for example, Turkish Office for Statistics. They have, for example, marriage age, but I have also found, for example, numbers related to suicide, and one category was relationships, failure of relationships. I'm trying, as you can see, to find some information on forced marriage, but directly on forced marriage you won't find in Turkey from like official statistic. And there are NGOs who work on child marriage. This is a very important topic in Turkey as well, child marriage, and there is, I think, plenty of literature also on regarding Turkey in this topic. I hope I have answered your question. If not, please feel to ask further. Yes, thank you. Gern geschehen.
From Merve Nur Duymaz, thanks in advance for this excellent presentation. I would like to ask you about Article 66 of your criminal code, which regulates expelling foreigners. In the cases in your country, forced marriage caused by foreigners is white.
Yes, unfortunately, we have this law in the criminal code, and forced marriage is mentioned as one of the crime in this article for expelling foreigners. and I think you are asking about the numbers. Yes, the Swiss Competence Center, the affected person that we are giving counseling and helping them have migration background. Actually, they are, I would say they are Swiss persons with migration background. So they grew up here, were born there, but their parents, maybe grandparents, have moved from another country to Switzerland. Again, forced marriage is a crime since 2013, and I'm just giving you numbers, how many jurisdiction are based on this specific crime is in Switzerland. We have, I think, so far 3 actually. I would say the one was in 2016 from the criminal court, and then the second one was very famously reported that was in the canton Basel. The father with Turkish background, so he was sentenced in the first instance, and then again this case went to the second instance, and that was last year. So this is actually the as you can see, we don't have a lot of cases, not only in Switzerland, also Germany, Denmark, Norway, many other Western countries who have introduced a specific crime of forced marriage. They also experience this. They don't have a lot of cases in the courts. And this again, what are the reasons? I tried to answer them in my presentation, why the victims don't want to go or start a criminal procedure. And we as a helping center, we don't have the obligation to report. But also this father that I mentioned in that case, he had Swiss passport, so he's not affected by this article of expelling out of the country.
Thank you. One from Nisa. Which legal action enforced in Switzerland that does not exist in Turkey do you think would be the most effective and beneficial to decrease the domestic violence or violence towards women in general in Turkey?
It's a difficult questions. I do not want to say this is better and this is not working. I think let me speak from the point of Istanbul Convention. There are specific crimes that Istanbul Convention is saying the states member parties, again here, Turkey is not a member party anymore, but in generally speaking, to have certain specific, to consider certain specific crimes is very important. Why is it important is to provide also adequate solutions, measures for the victims. For that, the authorities needs the understanding of these crimes, the specific aspects of these crimes. Like domestic violence is not, again, just domestic violence in any case. They might have different forms of them, and we have to understand the different factors. For example, coming back to forced marriage, there you have to understand a marriage is very own to every community. And you have to have this knowledge of these different communities living in one country, what happens in relation to marriage and why this forced marriage is happening. I think this specific cultural understanding must be a competence for also the authorities to understand them. This might be also part of the legal action, part of the enforcement of law as well. Just giving you an example, for taking cousin marriage. If you would ask, it might be very normal in Turkey, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan to marry your cousin, but it's not very general in other, for example, for Albanian speaking person or people from Chechenian, it's not normal to marry your cousin. So there are very specific cultural differences when it comes to marriage and forced marriage. There are forced marriage also among cousin marriages. And if you, I mean, as a legal action, if you want to deal against forced marriage, then you have to also understand there are communities and cultures who have a different aspect on them. So this is maybe this socio-legal aspect is much needed when we deal with different forms of violence, violence in general, also violence against women.
This is the last questions because we already exceed the time limit. So in some situation, women can committing crimes to protect themselves. In Turkey, with the mechanism that are currently used, there can be a second unjust treatment for them. What kind of mechanism exists for Switzerland?
Mm-hmm. Maybe is there any possibility to elaborate this question a little bit more? It's Elif.
I think it's like she's talking about the self-defense. For example, you are being exposed like violence and you are self-defending yourself. In Turkey, in some cases, you are not responsible, like criminal responsible for your act.
Mm-hmm.
Probably it's related to that.
Okay. I'm thinking, sorry, it takes a little bit time. Maybe if it's possible, I could come back to Elif Unschal, if it's possible. Self-defense, okay. Yes, I mean, there is the possibility to use or mitigate the sentence and then also the possibility of self-defense. Just briefly saying, but I'm not going in detail on the criminal specific aspect, but there is the self-defense possibilities there, if I have understood the question rightly.
Thank you. This is the last one. There was a march in Switzerland in 2019 about inequality of the retirement salaries, I guess. Are salaries linked to domestic violence? And if so, are there any regulation about that? Thank you, Hanu.
Yes, in general, this is the topic still going on, that women earn less salary for the same position as men. So the protest is also on the point of inequality of gender and working area. I'm sure there is also links to domestic violence. And then again, that most of the women work in Switzerland part-time job and very less men do that. So this is also one of the point. Regulations in the sense of law reforms or changing of the law is now happening, but what happens is the civil society and some departments from the government are talking more and more openly about this. And I think on the awareness is the steps are made on this on the level of awareness, but legally not any specific changement is made.
Thank you, like, for all your answers and also the perfect presentation. This is the end of Switzerland report, and I hope we see you face to face next year physically. And thank you so much again for everything.
Yes, thank you very much. And also thank you for the questions. And if you have any specific aspect that you want to know further, I think you could have my email and then just get in touch with me and we can discuss further. Due to the time, we have to stop here. And also thank you for the organization team for having me, and hopefully going to see you all very soon face to face, and stay everyone healthy and fit further. Have a good conference further also.
Thank you, Anu.